A wealthy man arrives home unexpectedly and discovers his wife assaulting the black daughter of their cleaning lady. His subsequent actions astonish everyone present. The click-clack of Viven's high heels resounded on the mansion's marble floor, preceding the muffled impact of a small object against a wall. "That useless child," she fumed. "How often must I tell her not to interfere with my possessions?" Jonathan Rivers paused at the threshold of the living room, still clutching his Bentley keys. His board meeting had concluded 2 hours ahead of schedule, prompting his decision to return home and spend a relaxed Friday afternoon with his family. The sight that greeted him rendered him immobile. Lana, a mere 8 years old, was huddled in the room's corner, her face streaked with tears, clutching a fragmented vase. A thin stream of blood flowed from a minor abrasion on her knee. Viven, his wife of 3 years, loomed over the girl, displaying an intensity of pure loathing Jonathan had never witnessed. "Do you comprehend the cost of that vase? You contemptible child." Viven jabbed a perfectly manicured finger towards the girl's face. "It's worth more than her mother makes in an entire year working here." Jonathan had been acquainted with Lana since her early childhood. Carmen, Lana's mother, had been employed as a cleaner in the opulent residence for nearly a decade, even predating his initial marriage. The young girl had consistently exhibited good manners, intelligence, and inquisitiveness. On occasion, she would accompany her mother to work during school holidays, and Jonathan always appreciated her company within the household. "Please, Mrs. Vivian," Lana's tiny voice quavered. "I was merely attempting to assist with the cleaning. The vase accidentally slipped from my grasp when a loud sound came from the television." "Liar!" Viven retorted, raising her hand as if to strike the child. In that precise instant, and realization ignited within Jonathan. It transcended mere fury. It was an unequivocal understanding of his wife's true nature. For 3 years, Viven had presented herself as the ideal spouse in his presence and before their visitors, always courteous, refined, and adept at social engagements. Yet now, under the assumption of being alone with a vulnerable child, her authentic self was revealed. "Viven." Jonathan's voice pierced the silence sharply. She spun around, her expression immediately transforming from harshness to a semblance of mild astonishment. "Jonathan, darling, I didn't realize you had arrived. This young lady just shattered the Ming vase your mother gifted us for our wedding." Jonathan observed the entire situation with a fresh perspective. Lana's frightened posture, the laceration on her knee, the child's defensive stance, all suggested that this was not a solitary incident. His corporate board meetings had honed his ability to interpret nonverbal cues, and what he perceived was the dread of someone who had previously endured similar circumstances. "Lana," Jonathan spoke gently, entirely disregarding Viven. "Are you injured?" The girl glanced apprehensively between Jonathan and Viven before offering a hesitant nod. "Where is your mother?" "She went to the market to purchase cleaning supplies for the kitchen," Lana responded in a voice barely audible. Jonathan knelt to the child's level, maintaining a slight distance to avoid increasing her apprehension. "How long has Mrs. Vivian been addressing you in this manner when I am not present in the house?" The subsequent silence conveyed more than any verbal reply could. Viven cleared her throat with an uneasy sound. "Jonathan, you are being overly dramatic. It was merely an unforeseen event, and I was simply instructing her on the importance of greater caution." However, Jonathan's gaze remained fixed on Lana. There was an element in the girl's demeanor, a premature gravity, a circumspection, unfitting for an 8-year-old. It was the look of an individual who had acquired the skill of foreseeing peril, of meticulously planning each action, of circumventing fits of rage. "Has she been severe with you on other occasions?" Jonathan inquired softly. Lana directed her gaze at Viven, then towards the floor. The terror reflected in her eyes provided Jonathan with all the necessary understanding. In that instant, Jonathan Rivers, the chief executive officer of a technology enterprise valued at $500 million, recognized that he had been utterly deluded for the past 3 years. More significantly, He grasped that a child had been enduring mistreatment within his own residence while he diligently constructed his business empire. Viven's facial expression underwent a subtle alteration as she perceived Jonathan's refusal to accept her account of the incident. For a fleeting moment, the same merciless gaze she had aimed at Lana flickered in her eyes before being swiftly veiled by an appearance of injured blamelessness. Yet Jonathan had witnessed it, and now, understanding the true nature of the individual he had allowed into his home, various past recollections began to align in a disquieting manner. The periods when Carmen appeared overly strained, the instances when Lana was unusually subdued in Viven's presence, the seemingly innocuous remarks concerning the appropriate upbringing of employees' children, all began to make sense. If you ponder how an intelligent man could be misled for such an extended duration, ensure you subscribe to the channel to uncover the extent of a person's manipulative capacity over those who place their trust in them, and particularly to observe the repercussions when that facade is finally shed. "Jonathan, you are being overly theatrical," Viven declared dramatically, arranging her platinum blonde hair with deliberately graceful movements. She destroyed an invaluable item. Someone must instill a sense of responsibility in these children, otherwise they will mature believing they can act without constraint. Jonathan observed the peculiar scorn with which she uttered these children, a disdain he had previously overlooked. 3 years of marriage, and only now did he perceive the subtle indicators he had entirely disregarded. "Lana," Jonathan spoke softly, disregarding Viven's infuriated expression. "Can you precisely recount what occurred?" The girl nervously alternated her gaze between the two adults. "I was assisting with the living room cleaning as I usually do when I accompany my mother. I heard a very loud sound emanating from the television and became frightened. When I quickly turned, my elbow struck the vase." "She's fabricating a story," Viven interjected sharply. "I witnessed her playing with the vase, pretending it was a microphone. These children possess no understanding of the worth of possessions." Jonathan knelt to Lana's eye level. "What particular sound did you hear from the television?" It was a woman shouting very loudly at a small girl on the screen. The woman said extremely unkind things to the girl, such as—" Lana paused, her gaze fixed on Viven with evident apprehension. "Such as what, sweetie?" Jonathan inquired gently. "Such as what Mrs. Viven says to me when Mom leaves to purchase items." The response emerged as an almost inaudible whisper. A shiver ran down Jonathan's spine. "For how long has this been occurring, Lana?" Viven cleared her throat boisterously. "Jonathan, this is absurd. Are you truly going to credit the fabrications of an indulged child?" She is unequivocally attempting to deflect blame from her actions. Yet Jonathan maintained his concentration on Lana. "Can you recount other instances where this has taken place?" The girl lowered her eyes. "Mrs. Viven stated that if I disclosed anything to anyone, Mom would forfeit her employment, and we would lack funds for sustenance. She asserted that individuals like us ought to feel appreciative to be here and refrain from causing difficulties." Jonathan felt a surge of indignation in his chest, but he maintained a composed tone. "People like poor people." And Lana faltered, touching her own dark skin. "Continue," Jonathan prompted gently. "People of our color. Mrs. Viven said I should always remember my place because girls like me cannot afford to damage the belongings of important people." The ensuing silence was acutely felt. Jonathan observed Viven, who had entirely shed the amiable demeanor she habitually maintained in his presence. For an instant, her social facade crumbled completely, exposing a cold and manipulative quality that caused Jonathan to doubt whether he truly understood the woman with whom he had shared his life for 3 years. "This is a misinterpretation," Viven quickly asserted, noticing Jonathan's intense scrutiny. "I was merely attempting to instruct her on proper boundaries. Carmen is a commendable employee, but she occasionally lacks oversight concerning her daughter." "Oversight," Jonathan repeated deliberately. At that very moment, the front door was heard opening. Carmen had returned from her shopping trip. Jonathan observed Lana instantly tense up, and Viven swiftly resumed her customary pleasant demeanor. "Jonathan, Lana," Carmen called out from the corridor. "Has something occurred?" Carmen entered the room, laden with brown paper bags, and immediately sensed the palpable tension. Her gaze swiftly moved from her daughter's injured knee to the shattered porcelain on the floor, and then finally to Viven's frigid expression. Jonathan discerned a quality in Carmen he had never noticed previously. The identical, controlled apprehension he had witnessed in Lana's eyes. How could he have been so oblivious for such an extended period? "Carmen," Viven spoke in an overly sweet tone, "your daughter had a minor mishap with the Ming vase. Fortunately, she sustained no serious injuries. However, we must discuss appropriate supervision when she accompanies you to work." Carmen slowly set down the bags. "Lana, are you all right, darling?" "I'm fine, Mom," Lana responded reflexively. Yet Jonathan noted how she deliberately evaded her mother's gaze. "Carmen," Jonathan stated calmly, "could you escort Lana to the kitchen? I need to attend to that injury. Viven and I will converse here." Carmen swiftly nodded, grasping her daughter's hand. But before their departure, Jonathan witnessed a silent exchange of glances between mother and daughter, a non-verbal dialogue indicative of shared apprehension and long-preserved secrets. As soon as they were by themselves, Viven promptly altered her approach. "Jonathan, my dear, you are permitting a straightforward situation to escalate into unwarranted melodrama. Children fabricate narratives, particularly when seeking to evade repercussions." "Repercussions?" Jonathan folded his arms. "What manner of disciplinary measures have you been implementing in my absence?" "Fundamental discipline," Viven responded, her voice losing some of its contrived amiability. "Someone must instruct this girl regarding deference and accountability. Carmen is excessively lenient." "And you believed it was your obligation to undertake that?" Viven regarded him as one might a child posing a self-evident query. "Jonathan, I am the mistress of this household. It is my responsibility to uphold order and appropriate conventions, particularly concerning the offspring of the domestic staff." The manner in which she articulated employees' children unveiled a social hierarchy Jonathan had been oblivious to until now. He began to ponder how many other aspects he had overlooked during the preceding 3 years. "What exactly are these proper standards?" he inquired. "Reverence for possessions, comprehension of suitable social distinctions, gratitude for the benevolence they receive by being permitted access here." Viven gestured expansively around the opulent residence, as if this were self-evident. A disquieting lucidity began to dawn on Jonathan. "Viven, Lana is 8 years old, precisely the optimal age to become acquainted with social strata. If she acquires this knowledge early, she will mature into an adult better adapted to the world's actualities." Actualities. Jonathan found it almost impossible to credit what he was hearing. "Jonathan, be practical." Viven exhaled with impatience. "Carmen is a house cleaner. Lana will likely tread the identical path. It is unkind to foster unattainable aspirations in individuals occupying certain social standings. I am simply equipping her for the realities of existence." In that moment, Jonathan understood that he had not wed the true Viven. Rather, he had married a meticulously crafted facade. The woman now before him, articulating concepts of social strata and appropriate roles for an 8-year-old, was utterly unfamiliar. "What if I disapprove of your methodology?" he queried. Viven emitted a laugh, a chilling sound Jonathan had never before encountered. "Jonathan, you dedicate 14 hours daily to constructing your empire. Do you genuinely believe you possess the leisure or insight to scrutinize how I oversee our residence?" Jonathan scrutinized his wife's countenance. "Our home." "Indeed. I have been overseeing all household affairs for 3 years. I engage staff, dismiss them when required, and establish regulations and benchmarks. You never concerned yourself with these specifics previously." For the first time, Jonathan pondered the number of employees Viven had terminated when necessary, and the underlying motives. How many families had suffered detriment due to her laxity in appropriately managing his own household? "Perhaps it is time I took a greater interest," he stated plainly. Viven scrutinized him for an instant, and Jonathan perceived a manipulative glint in her eyes. Naturally, darling, but you are aware of the potential complexities in such situations. Carmen is a faithful staff member, yet if she begins to create difficulties or encourages her daughter to be insolent, well, numerous individuals currently seek employment. The veiled warning was unmistakable. Jonathan recognized he was confronting a woman who wielded fear and financial precariousness as instruments of dominance. From the kitchen, hushed tones emanated. Carmen attended to Lana's wound while they conversed in whispers. Jonathan pondered how many analogous discussions had transpired over the previous 3 years. How many physical and emotional hurts had been tended to in silence? "Vivian," he articulated slowly, "I believe you and I must reassess certain aspects of how this household operates." She observed him with newfound discernment, realizing that an irreversible shift had occurred in their relationship dynamic. "Jonathan, I trust you are not contemplating making impulsive choices based on a child's exaggerated tales." However, Jonathan was no longer heeding her utterances. He was observing her subtle facial cues, her precise word selection, and how she cautiously probed the boundaries to ascertain the extent of her influence. It was akin to witnessing a master tactician at work, and he questioned how long he had been subjected to her manipulation without realizing it. For 3 years, while he dedicated himself to establishing his company and amassing riches, an 8-year-old child had been systematically undermined within his own residence, and the individual accountable for this was now devising strategies to circumvent his revelation, utterly misjudging his capacity for retaliation. What Vivian was unaware of was that Jonathan Rivers had not achieved millionaire status by the age of 35 through passivity or credulity, and she was on the verge of discovering that certain storms, once unleashed, devastate everything in their wake. In the kitchen, Jonathan discovered Carmen diligently attending to Lana's lacerated knee, with a tenderness that starkly contrasted the emotional cruelty the girl had endured moments prior. The dialogue between the mother and daughter occurred in hushed tones, imbued with apprehension and submission. "Carmen," Jonathan spoke softly, causing both of them to startle. "May we converse?" Carmen visibly tensed. 28 years of cleaning affluent households had instilled in her the knowledge that discussions of this nature seldom concluded favorably for individuals in her position. "Certainly, Mr. Jonathan, if I have committed any transgression." "You have committed no transgression," Jonathan interjected. "However, I need to comprehend what has been transpiring here during my absence." Lana clutched her mother's hand, her wide eyes fixated on Jonathan's countenance. Carmen glanced nervously towards the living room where Vivian lingered, clearly weighing the hazards of speaking truthfully against the perils of deceit. "Mrs. Viven possesses particular methods for maintaining household decorum," Carmen stated cautiously, selecting each word as though navigating a dangerous field. "What sorts of methods?" Carmen exchanged a quick look with Lana. It was the girl who then spoke, her voice small yet resolute. "Mr. Jonathan, may I speak candidly? Even if Mrs. Vivian becomes exceedingly displeased?" Jonathan knelt to Lana's level. "You are always at liberty to speak the truth, and I guarantee that no adverse consequences will befall you or your mother as a result." "Mrs. Vivian asserted that children such as myself must understand our station," Lana commenced slowly. "She declared it was extraordinarily magnanimous of her to permit Mom to bring a defective black girl into her exquisite residence, and that if I failed to conduct myself appropriately, she would dismiss us without providing recommendations." Jonathan felt his jaw clench. "Did she employ those precise words? She consistently remarks on how individuals of our complexion ought to be appreciative of the chances bestowed upon us by influential people," Carmen murmured, finally mustering the courage to speak. "And that children like Lana must comprehend they will never possess the same prospects as affluent white children, making it advisable to cultivate humility at an early age." "Mom wept last night," Lana added. "Mrs. Vivian claimed she would invent a narrative alleging Mom was pilfering jewelry if we created any disturbances." She displayed a bracelet stating her intention to conceal it in our bag. Jonathan felt a shiver of dread. Carmen, for how long has this been ongoing? Since the initial month following her marriage to you, Carmen confessed, tears beginning to cascade down her face. But Mr. Jonathan, we are reliant on this employment. It is solely Lana and I, and without references. Jonathan comprehended the flawless snare Vivian had engineered. Carmen was trapped between tolerating mistreatment and risking absolute financial devastation, and Vivian was fully aware of how to exploit that susceptibility.
Carmen, I want you to be aware that your position is secure, irrespective of any developments with Vivian, Jonathan asserted with conviction. And I desire to record every detail you have shared with me. Would you be amenable to that? Before Carmen could reply, Vivian's voice resonated from the living room. Jonathan, darling, where are you? We must resolve this matter promptly. I have a social obligation in an hour. Jonathan observed Lana instinctively recoil upon hearing Vivian's voice, and Carmen automatically adopt a deferential stance. 3 years of psychological indoctrination had transformed his home into a confinement for this family. Remain here, Jonathan instructed. I will retrieve something from my office, and then we will resume our discussion. In his private office, Jonathan powered on his laptop and commenced typing with alacrity. As a chief executive officer, he had handled numerous instances of harassment and prejudice within his corporation, and he understood precisely the type of documentation that would be required. However, his immediate priority was professional assistance. He contacted Diana Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney he had encountered at business networking functions. It was 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, yet Diana answered on the second ring. Jonathan, what an unexpected call. How may I be of assistance? Diana, I require your aid with a matter of extreme gravity. It concerns psychological and racial mistreatment directed at an 8-year-old child within my own residence. The telephone line fell silent for a moment. I am listening, she responded. Jonathan swiftly recounted the predicament. Diana listened intently without interjecting, posing precise inquiries that showcased her proficiency with comparable situations. Jonathan, from a legal standpoint, you are in a formidable position to safeguard Carmen and Lana, but the emotional harm has already been inflicted. We must act with promptness and thoroughness, Diana declared. Can I arrive in 40 minutes? That should be achievable, and Jonathan, document everything. Every conversation with Viven from this moment forward. Her behavioral tendencies suggest she will intensify her actions when she perceives a threat. While awaiting Diana, Jonathan returned to the kitchen. Carmen and Lana were seated together, speaking in hushed tones. Upon his appearance, Carmen promptly rose. Mr. Jonathan, upon reconsideration, perhaps it is wiser not to intervene in this matter. Mrs. Vivian has a valid point regarding certain aspects. Individuals such as ourselves ought to be appreciative. Carmen, Jonathan gently interrupted her. No one, irrespective of their complexion or societal standing, merits the treatment Vivian has subjected you to, and most certainly not a child. Lana regarded him with eyes that held a wisdom beyond her tender years. Mr. Jonathan, can we truly place our trust in you? Truly? The inquiry resonated profoundly. This 8-year-old was questioning whether an adult would uphold his commitments, a concern that should never plague someone so young. You can trust me, Lana, and I will demonstrate it to you. At that instant, they overheard Vivian conversing on the telephone in the living room, her voice heavy with annoyance. Yes, Mom. I'm aware you believe I am too severe with the staff, but someone must maintain these individuals in their appropriate station. Jonathan is overly lenient. He lacks comprehension regarding how to manage certain social strata. Jonathan, Carmen, and Lana exchanged meaningful glances. Vivian had inadvertently disclosed that her conduct was not an isolated burst of temper, but a calculated ideology she openly shared with others. Naturally, I will not permit Jonathan to undermine years of effort in establishing suitable boundaries, Vivian proceeded. If he chooses to assume the role of a social champion, he will discover that actions have repercussions.
Vivian's telephone conversation brought to light a disquieting truth. Not only had she mistreated Carmen and Lana, but she had also devised specific tactics to thwart any intervention from Jonathan. Her vocal inflection indicated she possessed strategies to address the unfolding circumstances, strategies that were improbable to be agreeable to anyone involved. Jonathan recognized he was confronting an individual far more shrewd and potentially hazardous than he had initially conceived. Vivian was not merely a biased person losing self-control. She was a methodical manipulator who had dedicated 3 years to contriving and implementing a system of psychological torment. From the living room, fragmented snippets of the phone conversation implied that Vivian was already marshaling external assets for her defense, and from her assured vocal timbre, she evidently presumed it would be effortless to nullify any menace Jonathan presented. What she remained unaware of was that Jonathan Rivers had forged a $500 million enterprise by possessing a shrewd understanding of human behavior, and when he ultimately resolved to act against an inequity, his reaction was consistently elaborately conceived and tremendously potent. While Vivian schemed on the opposing side of the residence, Jonathan assiduously recorded every utterance, formulating a counterattack that she would never anticipate. For certain conflicts are not triumphed through shouting or direct engagement. They are conquered through sagacity, assets, and an accurate comprehension of the authentic mechanisms of power in the tangible world. 20 minutes subsequently, upon Diana's arrival accompanied by 2 private investigators and specialized recording apparatus, Vivian remained engaged on her phone, orchestrating what distinctly seemed to be a defamation campaign against Jonathan. Her voice reverberated throughout the domicile with a self-assurance that was on the brink of transforming into a horrific ordeal. If Jonathan endeavors to create difficulties for me concerning this ludicrous scenario with the staff, we will initiate Plan B. Vivian chuckled as she spoke. 3 years of meticulously documenting his fits of rage and emotional erraticism will result in a substantial alimony payment. Jonathan subtly signaled to Diana, who promptly commenced recording. Carmen and Lana stayed in the kitchen, but were able to overhear every utterance via the internal intercom system that Jonathan had unobtrusively activated. Naturally, I fabricated certain situations to elicit his responses, Vivian proceeded. Wealthy men are so easily anticipated when they feel their authority questioned. And now, with this entire narrative of championing the black housekeeper and her young daughter, I can portray him as mentally unsound and incapable of overseeing his own wealth. Diana arched her eyebrows, murmuring to Jonathan, "She is admitting to conspiracy to perpetrate marital deception. Continue recording." Yet the most astonishing development was still impending. Vivian, utterly engrossed in her phone call, remained oblivious when Jonathan entered the room holding a tablet, live streaming the entire conversation to his professional LinkedIn profile, where he boasted more than 50,000 connections within the corporate sphere. The most amusing aspect is that I succeeded in instilling such profound fear in the black girl that she wouldn't even contemplate informing anyone. Vivian chuckled. Children from that socio-economic background are so effortlessly intimidated, merely menace the family's financial security, and she becomes utterly docile. The viewership count on the live stream had already surpassed 1,000 individuals, among whom were several chief executive officers and influential business figures Jonathan personally knew. Real-time comments began to appear, conveying sentiments of disbelief and indignation. Jonathan will discover that there are repercussions for meddling with my household management strategies, Vivian persisted, now unmistakably immersed in her illusion of command. And, if he insists on championing these individuals, I will ensure that the entirety of the social elite is informed of his true character, a man who prioritizes domestic staff over his own spouse. It was at that precise moment that Jonathan entered the room, still clutching the tablet. "Vivian, darling, you have spectators." She turned, her phone still pressed to her ear, and her complexion immediately blanched at the sight of the device in his grasp and the escalating viewer count displayed on the screen. 3,200 individuals just overheard your principles on domestic governance,
Jonathan calmly stated, including the board of directors of the Hamilton Charitable Foundation, where you have contributed your time for 2 years. The phone slipped from Vivian's fingers, plummeting to the marble floor with a resounding crash. Her mother's frantic shouts were still audible from the other end of the line. "Vivian, Vivian, what is happening?" Diana approached, presenting her identification. "Vivian Ashford, yes, we are aware of your genuine name. You are hereby formally apprised of an inquiry into psychological abuse, intimidation predicated on racial discrimination, and conspiracy to perpetrate matrimonial deception." "This is a misinterpretation," Vivian stammered, endeavoring to regain her self-possession. "You are extracting my statements from their proper setting." Jonathan emitted a bitter laugh. "Vivian, you have just publicly elucidated to thousands of individuals how you systematically tormented an 8-year-old child for 3 years, exploiting her skin color and financial predicament as instruments of coercion." At that moment, Carmen entered the room, holding Lana by the hand. The young girl directly met Vivian's gaze, and for the first time in 3 years, no apprehension was discernible in her eyes. "Miss Vivian," Lana declared in a surprisingly steadfast tone. "Mr. Jonathan taught me that individuals who harm children are termed bullies, and that bullies possess strength only when unobserved." Vivian attempted a final maneuver. "Jonathan, are you genuinely contemplating ruining our shared existence on account of a single employee? Consider the gravity of your actions." "I am indeed contemplating, Vivian. I am considering that for 3 years, you constructed a system of psychological terror within my own residence, utilizing a child as your casualty." Jonathan advanced towards her, his voice measured but unyielding. "I am considering that you have profoundly misjudged both my capacity to uncover the truth and the repercussions of your deeds." The tablet now displayed in excess of 7,000 viewers, and notifications continued to stream in. Messages of outrage, expressions of solidarity for Jonathan, and numerous business associates severing connections with any organization Vivian represented. "Your voluntary contributions at the Hamilton Foundation have been terminated," Diana notified her, reading from her phone. "The Malibu Country Club is rescinding your membership, and it appears 3 distinct charitable organizations where you held positions are expunging your name from all promotional content." Vivian sank into an armchair, at last grasping the full extent of her catastrophic decline. In under an hour, she had forfeited her societal standing, her affiliations with esteemed institutions, and her sense of self, which was derived from status and dominion over others. "The most satisfying aspect," Jonathan remarked, deactivating the live stream, "is that you orchestrated this entire situation yourself. I merely furnished the medium for the world to witness the authentic Vivian Ashford." Carmen approached Jonathan. "Mr. Jonathan, how may we express our gratitude?" "There is no necessity for thanks, Carmen. I offer my apologies for taking 3 years to perceive what was transpiring within my own dwelling." Lana released her mother's hand and moved towards Jonathan. "Mr. Jonathan, I now comprehend what Mom invariably taught me regarding virtuous individuals. They are indifferent to the hue of our skin or the extent of our financial resources. They prioritize whether we possess inner goodness." Meanwhile, Vivian remained mute, assimilating the total obliteration of her social and financial existence. A final alert appeared on Jonathan's mobile device. A journalist from a prominent local newspaper sought an interview concerning discriminatory behaviors within the domestic settings of affluent households. Vivian's collapse was not merely commencing. It was poised to become a paradigmatic study of how bias and the misuse of authority can be entirely exposed once veracity finally surfaces. And the ultimate irony was that she herself had furnished all the requisite proof for her own undoing, entirely underestimating the sagacity and resolve of the individuals she had endeavored to dominate for 3 years.